Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special session on how to play standards. This is my super simple jazz standards approach. This is going to be made into a blueprint, and we got a lot of cool training to do today. Before we get started, let's just kind of do a little bit of housekeeping here. So first of all, like I said, this is going to get turned into a blueprint. I'm going to show you later how you can access a blueprint absolutely free, including this blueprint if you want. And then I'm going to show you how you can get that for free at my Jazzedge Academy site. All right, so just hang with me and I'll show you that at the end. Since this is going to be a blueprint, I'm going to kind of record each section separately. So it's going to seem maybe that I'm like kind of stopping and then like, hello, and like, kind of starting again. That's because I'm just going to be stopping when recording and then starting another one. So just hang with me. You'll know when we're done because you're going to end up seeing this screen. Okay, so when you see that, thank you for joining me. Then you know that we're done. All right, so let's jump right into this and let's get started. All right, so welcome to this super simple jazz standards blueprint. What you're going to be learning in this blueprint today is how to be able to take pretty much any jazz standard and be able to create a simplified arrangement for it. Now, before we get into this too far, recognize you're not going to sound like Oscar Peterson or Keith Jarrett. It's not going to be a super complicated arrangement. It's going to be an easy arrangement. That does not mean that you cannot play this with a band, because I'm going to show you in this blueprint how you could take these techniques and either play solo or with a group, right? So super important techniques to learn. And if you're not used to playing jazz standards, you definitely need to know and want to know these techniques, all right? So we're going to be going through chord shells. We're going to be talking about some fills. We're going to be talking about rhythm. We're going to be talking about melody, all of that good stuff, all right? So we got a lot to cover. So I will see you in that first lesson. All right, so anyway, that's what it's going to sound like at the end of each section. So don't get confused. Now we're going to move on to the next section here. All right, so let's start with the melody. All right, let me pull up the melody here for Fly Me to the Moon. Now, many of you already probably know the song Fly Me to the Moon. All right, this is pretty much taken right out of a fake book. While we're talking about it, what is a fake book? Okay, so a fake book is like this, all right? This kind of stuff. Right, so typically what you'll see is you'll see just melody and chords above it, all right? And it's usually in a book, right? Each one of these would be considered a lead sheet. A collection of lead sheets into a book is called a fake book. Now, you've probably seen this one before. This is the real book, okay? So you can get that off of Amazon. I'm pretty sure Hal Leonard is the publisher who publishes that now, right? But you can grab all of those real books and you can get those online. So this is a lead sheet right here. So typically chords and melody. Now, what do you normally do with this? Well, the first thing you need to do is you really have to make sure you get down the melody. Now, I know a lot of students are like, yeah, whatever. I have the melody. I'm fine with the melody. I don't have to work through the melody. And that would be a mistake. Okay, you really want to make sure you get down the melody well. So let's go through that right now. And just quickly before I show you the melody, I put finger numbers in here. You'll see that there are finger numbers in, all right? But notice that in a typical fake book, right, you don't see any finger numbers. There's no finger numbers above the melody, right? So typically you will not find finger numbers, but I gave you finger numbers here, okay? All right, so let's go ahead through, and I'm just going to play it one time through here for you. All right, so you see, and again, if some of this is small for you right now, don't worry. You're going to be able to download all of this sheet music and all of the backing tracks. So it starts on C with your pinky. And then you're going to want to cross over with your second finger, and then use your pinky on the A. Fourth finger on the G sharp, all right? It says A flat. All of the virtual keyboard is set to flats, so it doesn't switch back and forth between sharps and flats. Cross over again with your second finger, then middle finger, then cross underneath with your thumb. And then here, just lift up to your pinky. And then you come down your thumb, and let's scroll down here. And we go thumb. And then here you can lift up again and then go, so you could go thumb, second finger to fourth finger, and then stretch up to the pinky if you want. Or you could go and then just lift up. All right, let's do the second part of the melody. And then here, go to your middle finger, because you're going to go up to your pinky there. Come down to your thumb. And that's the melody. So what I suggest you start with first is always do the melody. Make sure you could do the melody. And then what you could do is put on your iReal Pro track. Don't worry, you'll be able to download this iReal Pro track as well. If you don't have iReal Pro, which by the way, we didn't create iReal Pro, so I can't give you any support on iReal Pro, but go to iRealPro.com and they have their whole support forum and all of that there. But it is a great piece of software. It's only $16 on the App Store. All right. Again, I didn't make it. I don't get any residual or any kickback for recommending them. I just recommend it because it's really helpful. And you pay once. You pay $16 once and you own it forever. And you can download this file, bring it right into iReal Pro, and you have the exact same changes that are on the sheet music. All right. So now, but if you don't have iReal Pro, I'm going to give you two wave files, one at 90 beats per minute and another one at 110 beats per minute. All right. So both of those wave files would be you're able to play those if you don't have the iReal Pro software, right? So, all right, so let's go ahead through. This is at 90 beats per minute, all right? And I'm just going to play the melody through one time. And you can repeat it and go through the melody again if you wanted to. All right, and then of course with the melody, the way that the melody is written, you could have fun with that, all right? So remember that as long as you're playing the notes of the melody rhythmically, you could play around with those notes rhythmically. Now, obviously, I don't suggest that you change the rhythm so much that you no longer hear the melody, right? You want to make sure that you still hear the melody, but as long as you're still hearing the melody, then you're good, right? So then you're fine, all right? Okay, so let's go over here. All right. Okay. All right. So that is the melody. All right. So make sure you go through, practice the melody along with the iReal Pro track or those wave files, get down the melody. And that's that's the first step. Make sure you could do the melody. All right. I'll see you in the next chapter. And then we're going to start talking about shells. All right, so now let's talk about how to form our root 7 chord shells. It's going to take a little while because I'm going to go slow here, but this is extremely important to learn how to do this. So let's take the time and then, I just want to really make sure that you understand this whole process. All right, so first of all, I have a book that I created, which is my Piano Success Workbook. And in the back of that workbook is this sheet. Now, of course, you're looking at it and you're probably saying, that's a little too small for me to be able to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this particular section. And notice what it says here. This is included with the blueprints, right? So you will get this sheet along with the blueprint so you can print it off. All right, so on that little section here, right, that little section here in red, this is what you see. Again, it's still a little bit small. Don't worry, you'll be able to download it and you'll be able to print it. All right, so over here on the left, you see what is the chord type. Major seventh, I'll read this to you. Major seventh, minor seventh, dominant seventh, and diminished seventh. Okay, and then over here on the far right, it says the seventh is down a blank step. So now this is how far down is the seventh of the chord from the root up top. All right, so let's pause for 1 second. Let's talk, first of all, what is a chord? A chord is anytime you're playing 2 or more notes. So this is a dyad, a 2-note chord. 3-note chord is called a triad. A 4-note chord is called a 7th chord or a block chord or a 4-note chord. All right. So this is typically what we would be playing, right? If we're playing jazz, we're like, right? We'd be playing these like 4-note block chords. The problem though with playing these 4-note block chords is that, well, number one, they're very blocky. They're all built on thirds. You can only play them so low. This starts to get a little bit low even right here. Starts to sound a little bit muddy. And also, it just doesn't sound very jazzy. And as jazz musicians, what we're going to do is as you start to build up your skill level, you're going to start to take some of these inner notes and then move them over here into the right hand. Right? So this is why we utilize our chord shells, because the chord shells open up our sounds, right? So now I said that we're going to do our root 7 chord shells. Well, again, if I have my C major 7th, that's my root, my 3rd, my 5th, and my 7th. So a root 7 chord shell is the root and the 7th played at the same time. That's a root 7 chord shell. This would be a root 5 chord shell. That would be a root 3 chord shell. So think of a shell just like a shell that you would find on the beach, right? It's the guts of the shell are long gone, right? So they, it's either been eaten or moved to a different shell. So it's just the outside notes of the chord. But don't get confused, because when we do like a root 3 chord shell, that's not the outside notes, right? But our root 7 chord shell is kind of like the outside, right? Because the guts of the chord are missing. All right, so on the major 7th, it says how far down is the 7th? The 7th is down a half step. So if I play my octave, C and C, if I go down a half step, that's a C major 7th chord shell. And then for the minor and the dominant, it says down a whole step. So again, my root, down a whole step. Real quickly, half steps are when you have no note in between, right? There's no note in between, no other note in between those 2 notes. A whole step has 1 note in between, or you could think of it as 2 half steps, okay? So there to there is a whole step, there to there is a half, whole, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. Right? So you should be able to figure it out from there. And if you don't know whole steps and half steps, be sure to take a look at my 30-day piano playbook, which is also available for free on Jazzedge Academy. All right, so anyway, C major 7th, that would be a C major 7th root 7 chord shell. That would be a C dominant 7th root chord shell. Right? That would also be a C minor 7th root 7 chord shell. And then for diminished, that would be our root 7 chord shell, even though it's really a root kind of 6, it feels like, right? But this, for a diminished chord, remember diminished chords are double flatted 7th. If you don't know that, don't worry about it. Just know it's down a whole step and a half step. All right, so I have another way that I wrote this out for you to make it a little bit easier for you. Okay, so major 7th, 7th is down a half step from the root. Minor 7th, 7th is down a whole step from the root. This is what we're talking about. You're going to keep playing the root down here with your pinky, right? Dominant 7th, same thing, down a whole step. And then notice this says diminished or 6th chord. So if I'm going to play like a C major 6 chord, that's what I would play. That's the root and the 6th right there. Right? That's the same thing for my diminished chord as well. So C major 6 is that's all 4 notes, but I'm just going to play the root and the 6. For diminished, that's all 4 notes, but I'm just going to play the root and the 6, even though technically this is called a double flat 7 for diminished. Right? Okay, so that's my root 7 chord shells. So some of them may very well be a root 6, right? But root 6 or root 7, right? Okay. All right, so with that said now, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to want to apply these root 7 chord shells to our song. Right? We're not going to do it just yet. What I want you to do is before you move on to that, just try playing a few different chords and see if you're able to, you know, form some of these root 7, root 6 chord shells, right? So just think of a chord like F major 7th, all right? It's an F major. So start with your octave if you want to, and then the major 7th is down a half step. Okay. What about C minor 7th? All right. Start with your octave. The minor 7th, the 7th is down a whole step. So that would be a root 7 chord shell for a C minor 7th chord. What about a C dominant 7th chord? Boom. There you go. It's exactly the same thing, right? So you might be wondering, well, wait a second. If the C minor and the C dominant 7th share exactly the same chord shell, how do we know what chord it is? Well, that would be a great question. It's ambiguous, right? You won't know unless you add in the third of the chord. So either E natural for a C dominant 7th or an E flat for a C minor 7th. Wait a second, Willie. Does that mean I have to add in the chord in order to play that root 7 chord shell? No, absolutely. You do not have to do that. All right. That's the whole idea of these shells, is that you're just playing the root and the 7th. So you don't have to worry about defining the chord by adding in that third. You can just leave it as is, right? And then it's totally fine, because oftentimes the melody will play the third, or you might define the chord in some other way, or it's just ambiguous, and that's okay for right now. All right. So, all right, so now let's move on to our root 3 chord shells. So I've already done root 7 chord shells. Now let's form our root 3 chord shells. So again, on that sheet, you're going to see this section of the sheet, right over here in this red box. Again, I know it's small, so let's make that a little bit bigger. So now here is a different way of looking at your 7th chords. This is really great stuff to know. I know it's a little bit small, so I'm going to just kind of like read it to you. This says major 7th, and that's 1, 3, 5, 7 from the major scale. So again, this is why you need to learn your major scales. If you do not know your major scales, don't worry. The Jazzedge practice curriculum at Jazzedge Academy goes through all of your major scales, all right? So all the proper fingering, the technique, all of that, you get that all as being a member of Jazzedge Academy, right? So that's all part of that foundational Jazzedge practice curriculum, all right? So anyway, so root 3 would be 1 and 3, right? So for major, it'd be 1 and 3 from the major scale. For minor 7th, it's 1 and flat 3. For dominant, it's 1 and 3. Diminished, 1 and flat 3. Minor 7 flat, so on and so forth, right? So what I did here was I made a easier way for you to see this, okay? And I also kind of color coded this a little bit so you could see the similarities between these different root 3 chord shells. So you see the chord quality: major 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7th, diminished, or 6 chords, right? And that would be like a minor 6 or a major 6, okay? So now, but now the thing is, if this is I shouldn't have said major, minor 6 or major 6. This would only be for a minor 6 chord, okay? It would be a minor third up 3 half steps. If it was a major 6 chord, then it has to be up 4 half steps. I'll explain that in a second. All right, so let's go through the major 7th right here. Okay, so the major 7th, start on any note. So here, let me start on C. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to count the note I'm on. I'm just going to count up 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's my third, right? Another way I can think about it is it's just the third from the scale. So if I know my major scale, I can play the root and the third. A minor 7, it's up 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. So there you go. And then here I'm using my second finger and my thumb. I almost always use second finger and thumb. The only other fingering that I may use is middle finger and thumb. It's always thumb on the third. It's either middle finger or second finger on the root. And while we're talking fingering, for the root 7 chord shells, it is always pinky and thumb. Pinky and thumb, right? Don't use fourth finger. Don't use middle finger. Don't use 4 and 2. Nothing like that. Always pinky, always thumb. Let's do F minor 7th. Okay, so F minor 7th, the third is minor. So it's up 1, 2, 3. 3 half steps. Dominant 7th, the third is major. So C7 again, there you go. And then for diminished, it's a minor third. Okay, so now this is what I'm going to say is I'm going to put this in minor 6 chord, and this is going to be, let's do this. Let's make it clearer for you. All right, so for a major 7th or a major 6 chord, it's root 3 like this. Okay, major third. For a minor 7th, it's root and flat third, or a up 3 half steps. However you want to get there is fine. For dominant 7th, it's major third again, and for diminished, it's minor third. So you see that the third is either going to be a major third or a minor third. It's just going to depend on the chords, right? Let's talk about some other chords. A minor 7 flat 5. Minor 7 flat 5, right? It's going to be a minor third. An augmented chord has a major third, and you see all of that once again right in here, right? Augmented 1 3. So the ones with the flat in front, those are the minor thirds. The ones with the natural third, that's your major third. Okay, all right. So now we should know how to form a root 7 chord shell and a root 3 chord shell. Let's just go through a couple of root 3 chord shells just to make sure you got it. Let's try B flat major. All right, so B flat, and you can pause the video if you want and try and figure it out yourself. So if it's B flat major, I know it's a major 7, so it's going to be up, it's a major third, but let's say I don't know the major third for B flat. All right, then just count up 4 half steps. Again, do not go 1, 2, 3, 4. Do not count the note that you are starting on, right? Do not count the note you're starting on, right? So B flat, count up 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. B flat major. Right? What about G flat minor? Now, a lot of times you might think, oh my goodness, that's really difficult. Well, find G flat, G, there's G flat. Well, if it's G flat minor, just do the counting. Count up 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. There you go. There's G flat minor. What about B dominant 7th? B dominant 7th. Start on B, dominant 7th. It's a major triad, or I'm sorry, it's a major third. So I'm going to count up 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. Now, you're not going to have to do all of this counting all of the time. As you start to play this stuff more, you're going to start to be able to grab at these chord shells a lot easier. But when you're first starting with this stuff, it's absolutely fine if you have to count that stuff out. Nothing wrong with that, right? Let's do one more. Let's do A diminished, right? So I'm going to put my second finger on A. I know it's a minor third, up 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3. There you go. A and C. Okay, that would be my root third for my A diminished chord. All right, so now at this point, you should know how to play your root 7 chords or your root 7 chord shells and your root 3 chord shells. If you do not feel comfortable yet on that, go back, review those chapters, because what we're going to start to do is we're going to start now putting the root 7 chord shells to the melody. So I'll see you in the next chapter, and we'll go through that. All righty. By the way, while I take a quick pause here, Armen, how you doing? Nice to see you. Thank you, and Vinny as well. Yes, still playing in Rhode Island. I am still in Rhode Island, so nice to see you again, Vinny. Okay, so now this is where the rubber meets the pavement. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to now apply these root 7 chord shells to our melody. All right. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to play it for you so you could just kind of hear what this sounds like. Now, what I'm going to do is I will play a little bit of rhythmic comping in the left hand, but not too much. I just want you to kind of hear how it sounds playing just a root 7 chord shell when you have a bass and drum accompaniment behind you. It sounds pretty darn good, all right? Again, you're not going to, blow the doors off the jazz club, but you'll be able to get the job done and be able to play the tune. All right, so now maybe you agree with me or you don't, but I think that sounds, not too shabby, right? Especially for if you're a beginner, to be able to get down a sound like this and be able to play with iReal Pro and be able to play with decent time, that doesn't sound that bad, right? But notice you have to be able to move from one chord to the next chord, and that's where the practice comes in. All right, so let's talk about these root 7 shells, right? And let's get these up here. All right, so let me just okay, good. I did fix that there. Oh, you know what? I will have to fix one thing. Some of these finger numbers, some of the measure numbers here are wrong. So I'll fix that before I upload this final sheet music. So don't pay attention to measure 33. That's coming from the end of this over here. All right. All right. So anyway, let's go through each of these chord shows. A minor 7. All right. It's a minor 7. Okay. So now remember, this is where this kind of stuff is going to come in handy, and that sheet. So you're going to want to download these, print these off, probably have them close by to the piano. I'm just going to tell you how far down the 7th is, all right? So that way it's not, confusing for you. You don't have to kind of flip back and forth. All right, so A minor 7th, 7th is down a whole step. So again, if you want to, you could start with the octave and go down the whole step. Now, that approach of starting with the octave and going down the whole step, remember, you don't want to do this. Right? So, obviously that sounds wrong, right? So you don't want to hit this and then do this whole process. That process should kind of go on in your brain silently, and then you just get right to the root and the 7th. Right? That's where the practice comes in. Right? But for right now, we're just going to do that just so you kind of know what's going on with that 7th. So there's the A minor 7th, the root and the 7th. Right? Let's go through all the chords, then we'll put them together along with the melody. D minor 7th, 7th is down a whole step. G7, 7th is down a whole step. Okay. C major 7th, right? That's what the triangle means. It's a major 7th, down a half step, right? So just down a half step. F major 7th, again, down a half step. B minor 7 flat 5, it's a minor chord, so 7th is down a whole step. E7, dominant chord, 7th is down a whole step. And then we have A minor, again, 7th is down a whole step. We keep going, D minor 7th, 7th is down a whole step. G7, 7th is down a whole step. E minor 7th, 7th is down a whole step, right? Down a whole step. And then A7, 7th is down a whole step. Okay. And then D minor 7. I brought this one down here because otherwise it would conflict along with the melody. So D minor 7, 7th again, down a whole step. See how most of these, the 7th is down a whole step. G7, 7th down a whole step, except for the major. And remember, the 7th being down a half step, there's only one chord that the 7th is down a whole step, and that's some type of major chord. That's either a major chord or a minor major 7th, that kind of chord, right? But you don't find a lot of those minor major 7th chords, right? So that 7th being down a half step is really kind of only those major chords, and you're not going to find as much of that. So when push comes to shove, what I'm saying is most of the root 7 chords are going to be down a step, right? So most of those 7th are going to be down a whole step, right? B minor 7, down a whole step. E7, down a whole step, right? Let me keep going. A minor 7, down a whole step. D minor 7, down a whole step. G7, down a whole step. C major, half step there. Then F major, half step there. B minor 7 flat 5, whole step. E7, whole step. A minor, whole step. Same thing for the A7. So if you just play that twice, right? And then D minor 7, whole step. G7, whole step. E minor 7 flat 5, whole step. A7 flat 9, whole step. And then D minor, whole step. G7, whole step as well. And then we come to the C major 7th, which would normally be a half step. But notice what I said here. Using a 6 chord here for a, quote, sweeter sound, since the root conflicts with the 7th of the chord. right? So that's my melody note. Doesn't sound very good, does it, right? Whereas if I play the sixth instead, that sounds a little bit sweeter. How can I do that? Well, on a major chord, I could play either 7 or 6. This would make a C major 6 chord or a C major 7th chord. I kind of, like in my ears, I think of that C major 6 chord. Kind of gives it a more of an old-timey feel. Not really, but the 6th chord kind of sounds... It sounds a little sweeter, a little more dated, but I love the sound of it. Versus the 7th, right? Those are different inversions of those chords, right? You could hear that has a lot more bite in that 7th. So rather than playing the root 7 there with the major 7th, instead I'm going to do the root 6, right? It'll sound a little bit sweeter. Then I have B minor 7 flat 5, that's root 7, and then E7, again, root 7. All right, so now what you should do is you should go through and you should practice each one of these root 7 chord shells along with the iReal Pro track. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm just going to go through real quick and we're going to do all of them. Okay. Why do you want to do this before you play the melody with it? Because you might likely find that you have difficulty moving to these chords quickly enough. And if you're going to add on the melody on top of that, well, guess what? It's going to be just that much more difficult. So you want to make sure that you really, really have down the chords first. So let's do this. Just hold them out. Some of them are going to sound a little tense. It's okay. Don't worry about that. Right, now I'm not going to bother to do the second half of the song because the chords are pretty much the same, right? So you got the first half there. You can refer back to that and try playing along with me and then play the whole thing by yourself, right? You could download that iReal Pro track or the WAV files and practice all of that. Now, let's get into adding the melody into this. All right, so we have... Notice, by the way, the fingering is not here for this, and I'm not going to write in the fingering for it. I did it on the lead sheet. If you want to go in, you want to write in the fingering on here, go ahead and do that. But again, like I said, you're not going to find fingering in fake books. So you're best to start learning how to be able to do the fingering on the fly. All right, so anyway. Now here, these anticipations, right? So this is what we call an anticipation when we have that eighth note just before the resolution of the downbeat here. So it's anticipating that note. You can anticipate the chord as well if you want. So, right? So you can anticipate the chord along with, or you could come in with the chord on the beat. Whichever way you want to play it, it doesn't really matter. That will get more into your own personal style, which we'll talk about later. So anyway. 2, 3, 4. All right, now let's move on down here to the D minor. And the D down here. And then the B and the E. Okay. Continuing on. Hang on. Again, the C6 right there. And then you notice here, it says end here or repeat. So if you want to repeat, then you continue on, you play the B minor to the E7. Okay. All right. So that's playing the melody along with the chord shells. What I'm going to do is I'll go through one time. I'll play the entire melody along with the chord shell and the iReal Pro track. This time, though, I'm going to put it on 100 beats per minute. Right? Make it a little bit faster. Here we go. That's where I'll end, right? Okay, so that's playing the melody along with the root 7 chord shells. It's going to take everybody a different amount of time to be able to get that down. Be comfortable with that, right? If you can't get that down, within a day, an hour, a week, whatever it is, don't fret, all right? Just take your time, go through the root 7 chord shells, learn all of those chord shells. We've been through all of them now, so you can go back. It's written down. You have it on video. You could slow down the video. Go through, get down the root 7 chord shells, get down the melody. Practice each of them separately. Then just try one line at a time. Literally, just start at the top, right? And just do that one line. Don't even worry about the rhythm. Just get the right notes and the right fingering and get the rhythm as close as you can. All right? But if you're playing it like this, right? That's not the rhythm, but it's relatively close. Okay, so just try and do that and then work up one line at a time. Point is this: it's going to take time to be able to get this down, and you will likely find that you're going to hit these chords one day fine, and then come the next day you have a complete brain freeze on some of these chords. That is absolutely fine as well, and completely 100% natural, right? The last thing I'm going to say is, do not try to get 100% on this stuff. Just try to get to 80%. Why not 100%, Willie? Because we are all flawed human beings. We all make mistakes, right? So you're never going to get to 100% perfection. Even the greats make mistakes, and you can hear it in recordings, all right? So just try to get to 80%. 80% means that, yeah, I got it pretty darn good, and I can play it most of the time without making any mistake. Right? What I don't want you to do is wait for perfection before you move on. You're better off moving on and just kind of keeping that flow going, right? But also make sure that you're not moving on if you're playing like... Right, if you're doing that, you're not ready to move on, right? You should be at least like... You can hear the rhythm is a little bit, it's not 100% perfect, but it's close enough right now that given time and practice, that last 20%, right, is going to work itself out, right? What I found over the years, and I've been doing this for decades, is that students would get uber focused on trying to get perfect on something and not move on, and then get frustrated because they're kind of stuck in one place looking for perfection. But the reality is that perfection might not come unless you move on, right? It's just that this weird dog chasing its own tail kind of thing. Because by moving on, you're going to be exposed to new songs, new chords, all of that, and you're going to gain new skills, which then means all the old stuff that you used to play, right, or you were playing at 80%, that skill is going to increase as well. So trust me when I say you do not have to get it 100% before you decide to move on. With that, I will see you in the next chapter. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to work through the melody with the root 7 or root 3 chord shells. Now, you might say, well, Willie, why don't we go through and play all of the root 3 chord shells? You absolutely can do that, but I'm not going to go through that in this blueprint for a couple of reasons. Number one, you should be able to figure that out. I'll go through some of it with you right now. But number two, you're never going to go through and play an entire song with just root 3 chord shells, all right? Which you're going to see in just a second why I want to do it. In fact, why don't I just go ahead and I'll play it, throw this melody up there for you. This is root 7 and root 3. But let me just do root 3 by itself. Right? You can hear that the root 3 chord shell is pretty thin, right? You're just playing 2 notes right there, a third apart, right? So it doesn't have a lot of oomph to it. Whereas the root 7 chord shells, even though you're moving around a lot, right? And it's not the best voice leading, right? Which is how we move from chord to chord, the way that we move those notes. Voice leading means we're trying to move in the smoothest, least amount of motion possible, right? So when we're kind of moving around like that, there's a lot of motion going on there, right? So it's not the best voice leading. That's why we alternate between a root 7 and a root 3 chord shell, which you'll see in a second. But anyway, the point is root 3 chord shells by themselves, kind of thin. You're not going to go and play an entire song with just a root 3 chord shell. But it's not a bad idea to go through and practice them if you want to. If you got the time, I'd say go through and just try playing all the root 3 chord shells just to make sure you got them all down, all right? All right, so here what we're going to do is we're going to start with the root 7, but now notice when I go to D minor, rather than lifting up and going to the D, I'm instead going to just play my root 3 chord shell right here. Now, this gives me something very, very important. It gives me the ability to stay close and not have to lift my hand. By lifting my hand, I have more of an opportunity to make a mistake and create an error. Notice when I lift up, I'm off here, right? So whoops, I hit the wrong note, right? Whereas when I'm right here, notice that all I do is I slide my thumb right on down to that F, and I'm right there, right? It's a lot easier to move right there. And then when I go to the G7, this is really beautiful. Take a look at the 3rd of D and then the 7th of G. It's the same note. Don't do that, though. Don't hold that down and then play that. Play all the notes again. So A to D to G to C to F. See that nice little crab walk you got going on there? A to D to G to C to F. And now for B minor, why didn't you go down there, Willie? All right, well, I could go down there. That would be fine. But then once I start getting down, see how I can get a little too low, right? It starts to get a little too low. So every now and again, I'm just going to lift up and move so that I kind of get my chords a little bit higher. So that's what I did there for the B minor 7 flat 5. But could I go from F to B minor 7 flat 5 like that? Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. I could go E7 there. But again, it starts to get a little bit low. So I try not to go too low there. So F, then I come up to the B, and then the 3rd for the E, and then the A, root 7. And then we go to the 3rd for the D minor, root 7 for G, root 3 for C, Whoops, I'm sorry, it should have been right here. Root 3 for D, root 7 for G, and then come up root 3 for E, root 7 for A. Right, so now from G, why didn't I have some kind of like slick, motion on it? Well, guess what? There's no notes in common here. So I had to make a decision. Either I come down to E or I go up to the root 3. Since I just did the root 3 on the D to G, E to A, see that pattern right there? It kind of sounds better to do that. Root 3, root 7 on G, root 3 on E, root 7 on A. Let's say that I decided to change. Say I did root 3 for D, then root 7 for G, and then I came down to root 7 for E, and then root 3 for A. I could do that. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just doesn't sound like it's the most streamlined motion. Okay, so D to G, then E to A, then back down D to G, and then to C. And then here I'm going to lift up, B minor to E, and then now I'm going back to my root 7 for A. Then D, then root 7 on G, root 3 on C, root 7 on F, lift up, root 7 on B, root 3 on E, and then root 7 on A. Root 3 on D, root 7 on G, root 3 on E, root 7 on A. Root 3 on D, root 7 on G, and then here, just root 3 on C. And then B and E if I'm going to repeat it again. All right, so before I move on, let's answer a couple of questions. Okay, the first question that some students are going to have is, well, why did you start with a root 7? Why not start with a root 3? You're absolutely right. And I would suggest that you try both ways, because what's going to happen is whichever shell you start on, all the other shells afterwards are going to get affected. So if I start on root 3 for A, what am I going to do for D? I'm not going to go, obviously, to root 3, right? That's defeating the point. I'm like having to lift up there. Too much of an opportunity to make a mistake. Check this out. Root 3 for A. What am I going to do for D? Ba-boom, because the 7th is already the 3rd of the A. So then that would mean I go to root 3 for G, root 7 for C, root 3 for F, root 7 for B, root 3 for E, root 7 for A. And then I would probably come up with root 7 for D, root 3 for G, root 7 for E. So you see how they're just the opposite, right? And then D, G, C. And then also, Willie, here, why can you play root 7? Why isn't it a root 6? Because the melody is the 4th to the 3rd. Remember, only do the 6th if the melody is the root. Well, I should say only do the 6th if the melody is the root, but it's really up to you. You could play a root 6 chord anytime you see a major, right? So it's completely up to you. But definitely make sure you play a root 6 if the melody is the root of the chord. Just sounds better like that, okay? All right, so it's important to recognize that whichever shell you start on, the other shells afterwards are going to change, right? Now, the other thing is, do I have to do this kind of voice leading? Do I have to go from root 7 down to root 3, right? No, I mean, like you could play the whole thing all root 7s or all root 3s if you wanted to. You're just trying to find the most streamlined way of playing this, right? Just so that it makes it so that you make fewer mistakes. But before you do the root 7 to root 3, you have to make sure that you go through the process. I'll get students that get upset all the time. Well, not all the time. Maybe that's being a bit dramatic. But I get students that get upset because they don't do the process, right? So they don't go through the process. They don't start with the melody. They don't do the root 7 shells. They don't really get down the shells before they add in the melody. They want to jump right into this, and then they get upset thinking that the process is flawed. No, it's not the process that's flawed. It's the fact that they didn't practice it in order and really make sure they got it down. When I say get it down, I'm talking 80%, right? That's what we're looking for. Not 100, 80%. So they're not getting it down to 80% before they move on to the next thing. So if you find that you're like trying to jump into this stuff and you can't do it just yet, you have to make sure that you follow the process. right? So please do that because that's what's going to give you the most success at this. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to play this, and let's do it along with the iReal Pro track, right? So you have that as well. So here we go. I'll put this back down to 90. I'll go a little bit slower for you, okay? And the beauty is with iReal Pro, you could change this so that every time you repeat, it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 metronome markings, right? So you can get faster each time as well. A lot of cool stuff that you can do with that iReal Pro. And again, you can do the root 3. And so you see how I switched from root 3, then root 7, then root 3, then root 7. I just kind of flipped it around. All right, so let's talk a couple of important points here. First point is take a listen to this. Right, so I think you hear already what the problem with that is, right? I'm playing that left hand way too heavy. The left hand is the accompaniment. That means it shouldn't be the star of the show. You should be accompanying, which means it should be much, much lower, right, in volume, right? It should not be that heavy. Second thing, the comping, right? So comping is basically just adding rhythm to the chords, right? That's the most basic definition of comping. So I'm just adding some rhythm to the chords. Which rhythm? You could do pretty much any rhythm that you want. A good one to know is that boom, ah, ah, ah. Very popular rhythm, used a lot, all right? It's the dotted quarter note into the eighth note, all right? So you could start with that, but you could really do whatever rhythm that you want. Now, if you take a look at the site, all right, and if I go to lessons here, and I just type in the word comping, you're going to see that I got a whole bunch of lessons here that I can go through for comping, right? So, I mean, geez, you got 9 pages here. Let's see what page 3 gives us, right? Advanced Jazz and Blues, Choral Chords and Comping, Ben's Blues, right? So you get all of these lessons that you can go through for comping. Okay, so there's plenty of comping lessons. Another great lesson is the No Bowl Guide to Jazz Piano, both the beginner and the advanced versions. There's some comping in there, so you can go through some of that series of lessons as well, right? The last thing I want to show you is listen to what happens when I bump this up, and let's go up to like 130 now. So let's say that I'm playing a gig and I'm going to do these shells and I'm going to comp and I'm going to be sensitive in the left hand. Take a look at, listen to how this sounds. I think it sounds pretty darn good. To my ears, that doesn't sound that bad, right? Again, it's not completely full, right? You can do your rootless chords and all that and add some notes to the right hand. You can make it a little bit more full, right? But if you're a beginner and you're just trying to get started with playing jazz standards, this is a fantastic approach to be able to get a decent sounding arrangement under your fingertips. And what's most important is you're getting down a decent sounding arrangement under your fingertips and you know what you're playing. You're not just reading it, you're understanding, oh, okay, I'm playing the melody over here and I'm playing my chord shells, either the root 7 or the root 3 chord shells, right? With that knowledge comes the power now to be able to apply that concept to any other jazz standard, right? In fact, let's take one real quick here. Let's see. Oh, okay. Nightingale sang in Berkeley Square, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. Let me make sure I get this spelled right. Okay. Nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. There you go, right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and play this along with chord shells in the left hand. Whoops. Sorry, couldn't hear beat 1. All right, so there you go. Not too shabby. What about There Never Will Be Another You? Yeah, okay. So let's do this one. Oops. What are we doing here? An E flat, right? Ah, shoot, sorry. You know what? Let me do this. I'm used to playing this in B flat, and rather than transposing this right now, I'm just going to go into B flat. Oh, yeah, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm playing the wrong darn tune here. Not There'll Never Be Another You. I actually know how you. Now that I know that, let me go back. I'll do There'll Never Be Another You. Let's do this because I just want you to see, especially with this, because this is like a Latin. Right. In fact, let's bump this up a little bit. Let's go up to like 180. Oops. I do it again. Right. So anyway, the point here is that I'm just playing chord shells in the left hand. I'm not playing rootless chords. I'm not doing some fancy chords here. I'm just playing my chord shells, right? And by playing those chord shells, I'm able to get a decent sound together, right? And that's the whole point of this. That's the whole reason why you do these root 7 and root 3 chord shells. All right. So anyway, so at this point, you should be able to play the melody along with the root 7 and the root 3 chord shells. If you can't do that, then don't move on to the next chapters yet. But if you can, I'll see you in the next chapter. All righty. Let me just put this iReal Pro back to... let's put this back to Fly Me to the Moon. Okay, there we go. All right, so now part of making a song your own and adding some flavor to it and some spice to it is doing some melodic embellishment. Now, I don't have any sheet music for this because melodic embellishment is really basically whatever it is you want to do, but there are some kind of rules that you want to follow. Rule number one: make sure that whatever you are doing with your melodic embellishment, you are not ruining the song. Okay. What I mean by that is, listen what happens if I do something like this. I mean, what the heck am I doing? That sounds terrible, right? I mean, it kind of sounds like the song, but it sounds like super goofy, right? So you want to make sure that you're always doing the song justice. And I've been on gigs in which, players don't do that, right? And it's really kind of cringeworthy. So you want to make sure that you're really just making sure that you're doing the song justice. That's rule number one. Rule number two is that you don't want to stray too far from the melody, because then it starts to sound like improvisation. So if I go, right, it no longer sounds like Fly Me to the Moon, right? So make sure that you're staying close to the melody. Does that mean you have to play every melodic note exactly as written? Absolutely not. This gets into kind of, tip, not really a rule, number three, but tip here is that the best way of doing melodic embellishment is start with the rhythm. Try changing around the rhythm. So rather than coming in like right on the beat, see how I could go. Right, so you see how I'll do it, right? Rather than just playing the note just one time, rather than playing that on the F there, the A once. So you see how I can like kind of delay that. See what I did right there? Kind of going ba 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 ba, that kind of half step there. Ba ba ba. Do a little crush note. Right? You could also do stuff like this. Just kind of like do a little flourish of a few notes, right? Or these are fun too, the double chromatics. You could add some extra notes. I'm thinking this is kind of off of F major. So you see, I outline that F major 7th chord. Okay, if that's too much, right? If this stuff is like, whoa, you just lost me, Willie. I'm not understanding what you're doing. Then maybe melodic embellishment isn't ready. You're not ready for that yet, and that's absolutely fine. You don't have to embellish the melody. You could just play it exactly as is. But for those of you that are like, I want to do a little bit more with the melody, try some of those tips first. Okay, start by playing around with the rhythm. Okay. Try repeating some of those notes. Try doing half steps. The other thing I like doing is these like turns, where you start on a note, go up and then down. So you can do that. Those are kind of cool, those turns. You could do the grace notes. Or the double chromatics. Okay? You could also go. You could play octaves if you want. You could also change the articulation. Right? So changing that articulation is also going to change that feel and flavor of that melody. Right? So the two main rules are, number one, make sure that you're doing justice to the song, right? And number two, make sure that you're not changing around the melody so much that it no longer sounds like the song. You should be playing the melody notes pretty close to where they are, at least at this stage of the game. You'll hear some pros like Chick Corea or whatnot, they'll play a melody and you're like, well, where's the melody? Yeah, that's Chick Corea though, right? He can do that. When you get to that level, then knock yourself out. You can do whatever. But at the beginning level, stay close to the melody because you're going to find more success with that. Right. So, and then the other thing is, the last thing that I'll leave you with embellishing the melody is have fun with it. Right. So if you try changing around the melody, record yourself, listen back to it, and ask yourself some of those questions. Am I doing justice to the song? Am I changing it around the melody too much? You don't hear the song anymore. Does it sound like it still flows and there's still a good rhythm to it, right? So, but don't be overly critical of yourself. Give yourself a little bit of a break. So check that stuff out. Ask yourself those questions. Record yourself. Ask yourself those questions. And then by listening back to yourself, you're going to see the stuff that you like and the stuff that you don't like. The other thing is make sure you're listening to other people play Fly Me to the Moon. And you could try mimicking what it is that they do as well. And of course, the last thing is we got a bunch of lessons as well on melodic embellishment and all of that as well inside the site. Take a look at the 12 days of jazz standards, all right, in the Jazzedge Academy. And one of those chapters, one of those lessons is on melodic embellishment, right? But if you just type in the word embellishment, you're going to find a bunch of stuff in the Academy for lessons as well. All right, so that's the end of this chapter. I'll see you in the next chapter. All right, so now let's talk about how to create your own style. All right, so style is very personal, right? So and it's one thing I wanted to check. Yeah, so all right, so style is very personal. Like so, and what do I mean by style is not necessarily what other musicians are going to mean by style, right? Even the definition of style is going to be up for grabs. But basically, the way I look at it is, what are you doing that, or what are you adding to the song to make it your own? Maybe it's a little. Maybe it's that little flair there in the melody. You're doing that kind of stuff. Or maybe there's a little comping rhythm. Maybe you're playing around with the dynamics. See, I did the melody there. Maybe I did a little phrase there in which I play the melody together, hands together, right? I could also do like kind of like a 4 to the floor kind of thing with my chords. Hey, wait a second. Can I use 7th chords? Sure, you can bring in 7th chords anytime that you want to. You can mix these chord shells with any other type of chord voicing, right? So it doesn't mean like if you play shells, everything has to be shells. No, you could do shells, you could do rootless chords, right? You can mix them all together if you know those different types of chord qualities and different chord structures, right? So you shouldn't feel as though you're stuck with just one thing. So style means that you are adding something to the song. As you move and progress through your lessons, maybe that's improvisation. That's typically how many of us add our style to a song. That could be a certain reharmonization or a certain rhythm. Maybe what you do is, rather than playing this as as a swing, you do it a Latin. And now, if you don't know bass line, like that kind of stuff, don't worry about that. That's not what this lesson is about, right? You could find all that stuff inside of the Academy, right? But the point is that you could change the style around, All right, that's what I'm trying to say here. Maybe you do it really fast or really slow. A good anecdote for you: Glenn Gould, who was a famous classical pianist, was famous for doing Bach at different tempo. All right, so if it would normally be one tempo, he would do it super fast. He was like kind of like a rock star in classical music. Really kind of cool. You should check out his recordings. But so he would change and kind of move outside of the status quo when playing Bach and do something that no one else was doing. He would use the pedal while playing Bach. That was like, oh, no, you don't play using the pedal while playing Bach. But he would do that, right? So the point is he added his own personal style. Sometimes it was a little controversial. Maybe rather than playing it in 4, you do it in 3. Right? So, and so on and so forth. So anyway, these are more advanced topics, right? So where we started in this blueprint was much easier. I understand that. So I'm only giving you this stuff right now just so you can kind of see how the arrangements and how your arrangements start to take shape, right? Because I want to talk about the embellishment and creating your own style, because a lot of times students will look at the chord shells and think, this is boring. I don't like playing these chord shells. They don't sound super interesting. Yeah, you know what? You're right. I don't play chord shells when I go out and gig. I'll play, like my rootless chord. I'll do bigger chords, change around the rhythm, all of this kind of stuff. But I've been doing this for decades, right? So if you're just getting started on this, you need to start someplace, and you need to start someplace where you could find success. This is how you find success. As you can see, I went through some of these other tunes as well, just playing chord shells. You could hear that you can apply these chord shells to a numerous amount of jazz standards, both ballads, Latin, faster tunes, right? If I'm going to do autumn leaves, right? And it sounds really good. What you need, though, in order to have your arrangements using shells sound good, is you got to make sure that you get down those chords and you get down the rhythm, right? Notice when I'm playing autumn leaves, right? I mean, if you're doing that, then it's not going to sound good. Or if you're playing, right, it's going to sound a little boring after a while. Okay, it will sound boring because rhythmically, melodically, it just sounds flat. That's okay. You start there, but then you start to spice it up with a little bit of rhythm, dynamics, articulation, stuff like that. Okay, so anyway, that's creating your own style. There's no one right way of doing this. There's no one way of doing this. It's really just a culmination of learning and trying out new things. And I cannot stress enough, try out new things. Try playing around with stuff. But make sure you try playing around with stuff after you've got down the basics. If you don't have the basics underneath your fingertips, then you have no business trying to play around with stuff yet. So make sure you've done all those other chapters and you really kind of know them at least at 80% before you try messing around with rhythm and dynamics and changing around your style. All right, so anyway, that's it. I'll see you in the next chapter. Okay, so finally, let's talk about where do you go from here. All right, so there's a couple of different things that you could do. The first thing that I would suggest is definitely make sure that you are taking a look at the Jazzedge practice curriculum right on the main dashboard of the site. So if I go to the site here, right on my dashboard, okay, my Jazzedge practice curriculum is right down in here. Oh, you know what? I did not set this up, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm stop this chapter. I'm going to log in here, and then we're going to try this one more time, just so that everybody's on the same page. Take a sip of my soda. All right. All right, so where do we go from here? All right, so the first thing I would suggest is when you're inside of Jazzedge Academy, make sure you take a look at this Jazzedge practice curriculum, okay, which is right down here. All right, so these different focuses. Okay, you can watch the tutorial videos, right? Mark complete. And then this is going to go through all of your scales, all that good stuff. And if you take a look at this little icon right up here, that's your Jazzedge practice curriculum. If you click on that, it's going to list out the entire curriculum for you, which I could show you a little bit of that right there. And there you go. Okay, so you'll have the entire curriculum now. You could also switch and do a different blueprint if you wanted to, right? So after you do this one, then another good blueprint to do would be take a look at this jazz piano one, right? That would coincide nicely with this. And then you could go ahead through and then work on these rootless chords if you want to, and see if you can apply some of these rootless chords to the Fly Me to the Moon lead sheet. There is also a Fly Me to the Moon lesson. So if you just type in the word moon here and do a search for it, Fly Me to the Moon is going to come up right there, along with How High the Moon, Moon River, Moon Dance, all that, right? But there is a Fly Me to the Moon lesson that you can take a look at. Some other great lessons to take a look at is the standards by the dozen, right? So if you go in here into lessons, right, and you go to view all courses, right in here, you will find your standards by the dozen. All right, I'll just do a quick search for it, and then you can go through all this. But I'm just going to type in STBD, standards by the dozen. Let me just do that. I guess I can't do the standards. And there you go, right down there, standards by the dozen. All right. So in this standards by the dozen, you have just a whole bunch of great standards. It starts with Days of Wine and Roses. You do Autumn Leaves, Misty. And the beauty of the standards by the dozen, at least the first 12, right, is that, and then it's not all jazz as well. You'll see that there's also New York State of Mind in there. Okay. Song for My Father. It's kind of a Latin thing. Right. So what's great about the first 12 standards by the dozen lessons is that you will do a chapter on shells. So if you've just done shells on Fly Me to the Moon, you could go right to Days of Wine and Roses and then play the shells for Days of Wine and Roses. Let me load that up for you, and then I'll show you the sheet music for that. So if we take a look at the sheet music here, you'll see that you got the lead sheet, but then you see how we go right into shells. And then all of that is taught to you as well. So you could kind of continue your work with shells. And this would be a great thing to do, is to go through and just try and do, maybe 4 or 5 other standards in which you're just utilizing these chord shells, right? So that would be a fantastic way to really make sure that you have down your chord shells. If you want to go in more of a bluesy, jazzy kind of vein, then take a look at the No Bowl Guide to Jazz Piano. Again, you could find that right in your courses. If you click on courses, you'll find it right in here. No Bowl. Okay, and you'll see it right here. No Bowl Guide to Jazz Piano. There's the beginner and the advanced. You want to start with the beginner one. All right, some great lessons in there. You'll go through shells, bass lines, improvisation, the blues, comping, all of that good stuff. All right, so that's another great place to start. All right, so that's what I would suggest. And of course, if you want to work with Jazzedge teachers, then take a look at the classes. The classes are fantastic. You could work with me in the Just Standards class. You could work with Paul in the Pop Rock, Nina in the Jazz class, and a whole bunch of other classes that we have. And of course, if you also need more help, you want kind of like more of a feedback directly from a teacher, then take a look at the coaching options that we have as well. All right. So anyway, that's what it is that you should work on. But try applying these chord shells to other standards. So if you decide, hey, look, the academy's not for me, I'm just going to go and I'm going to do my own thing. I wish you all the best. Good luck to you. If that's what you decide to do, try to apply these chord shells to other standards. So pick up another standard like Autumn Leaves and see if you could do chord shells with Autumn Leaves. And if you have any trouble with it, you can always come back to the site because we have a whole bunch of lessons on Autumn Leaves in Jazzedge Academy. All right, so anyway, that's it for this blueprint. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next blueprint. So we're not done yet. I just finished the blueprint, right? So now, any questions? I'll stay on for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and ask questions now. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. And when was this? Oh, yeah. While I wait for any questions, if you're interested in lesson bundles, take a look at this website address, jazzedge.academy/bundles. You can't find this on the website, all right? So you won't find that on the website. You need to actually type that in, all right? So if you go to the Academy bundles, you'll see a bunch of different bundles that we have, right? So those are on special right now. You could take a look at those, okay? And then also, if you're interested in getting this blueprint for free, right, just go to Jazzedge Academy, click on free trial right up at the top, put in your name, email address, and choose a password, and an account will get created for you. Once you get into your account, then you can simply just go right to your dashboard. Oops, sorry. Oh, I'm not logged in on this page. Hold on. You go right to your dashboard, and then you'll see your blueprint right up here in the top left. Okay, and then you could go ahead and switch blueprint or choose your blueprint if you haven't chosen one. All right. I don't see any questions. So take care, everybody. Thank you very much, and I will see you in the next live training.